You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app. Or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
With so much happening every day, now that lawmakers are back, we start with the matter of impeachment. That's been all the talk this morning as Kevin McCarthy emerged once again to defend his decision to, as we told you around this time yesterday, launch an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. It's not only questions about where is the evidence, whether this is appropriate right now, how it's going to be done, but also without a vote. This is something that, of course, Speaker McCarthy criticized Nancy Pelosi for heavily back in 2014 when she did the very same thing, and he tried to explain his rationale earlier today. Let's listen.
Nancy Pelosi changed the precedent of this House. This doesn't preclude from a... Nancy Pelosi changed the president of this House on September 24th. It was withheld and good enough for every single Democrat here. It was good enough for the judge. Why would it have to be different today?
Okay, September 24th. This is exactly what he said on that day back in 2019.
Our job is to legislate, not to continue to investigate something in the back when you cannot find any reason to impeach this president. She cannot unilaterally decide we're in an impeachment inquiry.
So it's kind of hard to rationalize these two at the moment. Then there's the question of evidence. James Comer and other leaders in the Republican Party held forth earlier today in a briefing to try to make the point that they had the goods, though it's been difficult to connect the dots here, and they will be holding a hearing, according to Comer. Remember, he chairs the Oversight Committee this month. We
plan on having a hearing in September that will kind of evaluate some of the things that we believe have happened from the Biden family that are in violation with our laws. So what I said in January holds true to today. We are following the money, and we will see where that leads us. Following the money. And not every Republican believes that there is a case here. Ken Buck remains a thorn in everyone's side on all this. The Republicans spoke about it on CNN.
I have not seen any evidence that links President Biden to Hunter Biden's activities at this point. I will be getting a briefing later in the week. I'm looking forward to understanding more of what the Oversight Committee has uncovered. But at this point, I have not seen that evidence.
All the while, Elise Stefanik called it the biggest corruption scandal, she thinks, in the history of the nation. This is where we begin. Of all places, with Stephanie Murphy. I didn't think this is what we'd be talking about today. The former Congresswoman from Florida is with us. Of course, former member of the January 6th committee. It's great to have you back in Washington and at the table here. Thanks for joining us on Sound On. This is not the only issue I want to talk to you about, but you, of course, served through the two impeachments of Donald Trump. You remember that day back in September of 2019 when Speaker McCarthy laid out that rationale. Does Nancy Pelosi deserve the blame for this?
You know, I think we should all brace ourselves for a lot of hypocrisy in the days coming forward where positions were held when the other side was using techniques that they now employ today and aren't critical of that. And I think the impeachment inquiry without a vote is one situation. McCarthy clearly is doing it because he doesn't have the votes to take it to the floor to get it passed. It's a 4-vote margin for him. And so this is a way for him to theoretically protect his vulnerable members, the 18 who are in Biden-won districts. But once you open this impeachment can of worms, you're not going to be able to put it back. And inevitably, this is likely to lead to an impeachment, and he won't be able to protect his members from that vote. And so it's just an interesting play to see how it'll play out.
Well, that's the truth. I mean, in an election year, he's going to put at least 18 people in the line of fire because of that vote, to your point, right? Republicans who won in Biden districts, if we can call them that, could be in great peril.
Yeah, and I think those Republicans are more moderate Republicans. They want to be focused on the economy. That is actually a political point that they could win on because the American people, based on the polling, are pretty unhappy with the Biden administration on its handling of the economy. And they want to be talking about the economy, where the Republicans have a strength. And instead, all of the air in the room is going to be sucked out by the impeachment proceedings.
Well, so let's try to read between the lines here a little bit. You know how this body works more than most people. It's been suggested that this might actually help keep the government open, that members of the Freedom Caucus wouldn't vote for a continuing resolution, although from what I'm hearing, they still won't, unless they got the impeachment inquiry. Marjorie Taylor Greene wanted to connect the two at one point. It's been suggested that The Speaker's concerned about a motion to vacate. He might get fired if he doesn't launch an impeachment inquiry. Is it all of the above?
You know, this Congress, it really has seemed that Speaker McCarthy is playing by live to fight another day. So he handles each crisis in that moment, buys himself some space, hoping that the dynamics change by the time the next decision has to be made, right? And so, you know, they should be focused on funding the government, but, you know, they've decided to open this impeachment inquiry. Does it change some dynamics in his caucus? Maybe. But when you don't link two things legislatively, there's no guarantee that you've bought anybody's vote for it. You know, like, because he did this doesn't mean that the far right is suddenly going to support funding the government.
Sure, yeah. You know what it's like to investigate something. In fact, it was, I believe, the largest investigation in the history of the Congress, the January 6th committee. We're about to see the Oversight Committee, Ways and Means, and Judiciary embark upon this. The Department of Justice is already, of course, investigating Hunter Biden. There's a special counsel there. Can they match the work of the DOJ? What's about to happen internally with an investigation like this launching?
Well, I also served on the Ways and Means Committee, where we use Section 6103 to get the former president's tax records, which I expect to see the Ways and Means Committee do this time as well. But I think there are limits to the investigative ability of Congress, because a lot of folks, when we asked them to appear before January 6th, chose not to. Although with Peter Navarro being convicted of contempt of Congress, maybe that changes people's minds and they'll be more willing to cooperate. With DOJ, when they issue, it's not a request, you know, and they have the full force of the law behind them and are able to secure information and testimony in a way that we didn't always see with Congress.
Did you hear from the special counsel as a committee member? To what extent was there ever cooperation, or was that a black box for you across the street? You didn't know what was happening inside the DOJ?
It was a black box, and at times very frustratingly a black box, because initially they were just prosecuting the low-level participants in the January 6th insurrection. And so as a member of the January 6th Select Committee, I wondered, when are they going to get to the people who masterminded all of this?
Yeah. To that end, and I want to ask you more about shutdown politics here, because you can probably shed some light on what's about to happen. But what went through your head when you saw the list of the indictments roll out in Georgia, followed on that unsealed recommendation by the special grand jury that brought in names like Rudy Giuliani, Michael Flynn? You must have had flashbacks from your own investigation.
You know, I wasn't surprised to see those folks named, but I want to remind the American people that it wasn't a prosecutor who did this. This was a grand jury of American citizens, average Americans who did their jury duty, who saw the evidence presented to them and thought that there was, enough evidence to move forward, and they're the ones that handed down that indictment.
Should Rudy Giuliani have been included in those indicted?
You know, I always let the legal system make the decisions that they think they can support beyond a reasonable doubt. And you never know who's cooperating in the background and what kinds of inside deals are going on there.
How true. As we spend some time with Stephanie Murphy, the former Congresswoman from Florida, if you were still in the building, what would you be preparing for here? It looks like there might be a stopgap solution. Budget talks, though, seem to be off the rails unless something major changes here, not only between the House and the Senate, but between Republicans in the House. Democrats don't have a lot of power over what's about to happen, right? Do you think that we'll avoid a shutdown?
It looks like we're barreling headlong into a shutdown, and I think if I were still a member, I'd be preparing for some long nights and maybe weekends in Washington as shutdowns happen. They usually try to time the shutdown for like a Friday and then use the weekend to negotiate through it so that the impact is muted on the federal government and federal workers, and hopefully by Monday morning you have a solution. But we are dealing with people who don't believe in government. The far right, a shutdown isn't a bad thing for them. That's actually what some
members are calling for.
So I think this could be a protracted standoff.
Goldman Sachs says 2 to 3 weeks for a possible shutdown. Is that real in your view? Because
they have defanged the shutdown, so it isn't it's
not
mitigated, not a total shutdown. Yeah. It allows shutdowns to drag on for a little bit longer. And so I think buckle up. This fall is going to be an interesting one.
Well, it's an interesting world we're in when we consider depriving members of the military their paychecks, and I realize those would be restored after the fact, but that's happening at the same time as a lone senator from Alabama conducts this blockade on military promotions. Senator Tommy Tuberville, in fact, joined us yesterday here on Bloomberg, on Balance of Power, on Bloomberg TV. I asked him about readiness. You used to work for the Department of Defense, and you have a sense of what we're talking about here more than those of us who have not served. Here's what the senator said, and I'll be curious to have you respond.
They have no clue of what this policy is. They just wanted to change it to let the American people know, hey, we can do what we want to, and I'm not going to allow them to do it. Now, if they continue to do it, we're going to have the same people in place as admirals and generals. Again, there's no readiness problem. We got people in place that are doing their jobs.
His point is that if this continues, and by the way, we're at 9 months or something at this point, military families in temporary housing waiting for confirmations, we don't know when. But he says, hey, we've already got good generals and officers in place. What's the difference if they hang on a little longer? How does this impact readiness in your view, or doesn't it?
I think it impacts not only readiness, but morale and leadership within the Department of Defense and within the military broadly. And it's actually really ironic that the party who wraps itself in the flag and in the military is the one that is harming military families and the U.S. military's readiness at a time when our adversaries are challenging our leadership in the world. Mm-hmm. One of the first areas that gets cut is training, and that goes directly to readiness. We don't let our pilots, fly. They don't use live ammunitions in training. Those are ways in which the military can reduce its spending, and it goes right to the readiness piece. But on the leadership piece, the Joint Chief of Staff, he has a deadline where he cannot continue to serve. Right. And so we're going to let our military go without a military leader because one senator wants to be obstructionist?
We're going to speak a little bit later in the broadcast with Michael McCaul, one of your former Republican colleagues, chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He called this paralyzing to our military. Is it going to take more Republicans like Michael McCaul to bring this to an end? What's the off-ramp here for Tommy Tuberville?
I think the Senate Republicans own this one, and Mike's a great guy, and I'm glad to hear him using his voice. He's reasonable. He understands the debilitating nature of what is happening, and he cares about the military and the families, and so I'm glad to hear him speaking out. But Senate Republicans need to make life very uncomfortable for the senator who's holding up all of these confirmations. Mm-hmm.
Should the White House or should the administration threaten federal funding for programs in Alabama? How do you make them uncomfortable?
Well, I don't think that we should weaponize government because you're just really punishing people who live in Alabama if you were to threaten that. But, his Senate colleagues need to put pressure on him, find out what it is that he needs, and give him half of that, half of the loaf, and then move on. But this is playing with our national security, and it's hurting the very people who have stepped up and decided to serve this country.
Well, one thing we know is he's not getting Space Command in Alabama. Maybe that's the beginning of the pressure, right? I'm so glad you could come to see us. Whenever you're in Washington, I hope you will do that very thing. Stephanie Murphy, thanks for talking with us, as always.
Great to be
here
with
on Bloomberg Radio. And on YouTube, I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Thanks again to the former Congresswoman, and a fascinating conversation that we'll bring to our panel next. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, only here on Sound On. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
As we find the headline on the terminal, GOP hardliners stall military funding, raising shutdown risk. And we add the voice now of Michael McCaul, the congressman from Texas who chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, it's great to have you with us on Bloomberg. Thanks for coming back. And now that we're getting back into the swing of things here in Washington, indeed, we'd like to ask you about a few issues. But with regard to this latest development here, did that make a government shutdown more likely?
Well, as I understand it, the rule has been postponed. I think they're working out details with the defense appropriations bill. So I would not try to read too much into that. I'm still hopeful that we will have, a rule vote this evening and move forward with the defense appropriations bill, possibly as early as tomorrow. So I don't see that shutdown as imminent as maybe you're indicating. Frankly, I'm not a big fan of shutdowns. I've never seen a shutdown work very well, especially for my party. Republicans always tend to lose when the government's shut down. So I think the American people want us to govern, and they want us to get things done. I think the speaker is trying to do that. And it's, as you noted, very difficult under the circumstances. But, he's always been underestimated every time, and he seems to be able to pull, a rabbit out of a hat, in prior legislation that we've had. So I still remain optimistic.
Congressman, what we're talking about here is that hardline House Republicans didn't even vote to allow defense spending to be debated. This is in the House. In the Senate, we still have Senator Tommy Tuberville holding up more than 300 military nominations. What do you say to American people who look at both the House and the Senate and say the Republican Party is potentially hurting the U.S. preparedness, military preparedness, and it can cause national security concerns?
I share those concerns, and I voice those on CNN, State of the Union on Sunday. But I think it's important to put it into context. The Biden administration, for the first time, used taxpayer dollars to fund this abortions within the military. That's never been done on the National Defense Authorization. In fact, we cured that in the House with our NDAA bill that will be conferenced with the Senate. So my whole point was that I don't think one senator blocking all these nominations is really the more productive route. I think the best route is to deal with this in the conference committee that we will have House and Senate to ensure that taxpayer dollars not being used for abortions in the military. I think holding up these nominations, I've talked to a lot of, brass at the Pentagon, and what I just worry about is that it will impact our national security. There's a debate about that, but I don't see how you can have all these openings unfilled without having some impact on the ability of the military to be ready.
We were actually joined around this time yesterday by Senator Tommy Tuberville himself. He made the case to us that this does not impact readiness, that the rank and file will be just fine, and we have too many generals anyway. You've called this paralyzing to the military, Congressman. What message does it send to China?
Well, if we don't have top key positions in the Pentagon filled, I think it's a sign of weakness. I think it projects weakness, and that's always very dangerous. It invites aggression. I know that Schumer does have the ability to put these nominees forward, and I would hope they can come to a consensus over there. But just holding up these nominations ad infinitum, I think is dangerous. It's well-intentioned. I think he and I both agree, that being Senator Tuberville and I both agree, that taxpayer dollars should not be used for abortions in the military. We fixed that in the House. We're going to conference with the Senate, and I feel very confident that that will be not be a part of the final package. But it's all about the method and how you want to achieve the same goal. And I think holding up these nominees in key positions at the Pentagon does not send a very good message.
When you look at China, we have to ask you what you make of Huawei coming out with this phone that looks like they use technology, the exact technology that there are export controls on China and Chinese companies, CSMIC and also Huawei, both on the entities list, to make sure that China actually doesn't have these capabilities, yet a phone arrives. Do you think the export controls that are on China right now are working?
They're not being enforced. SMIC has American component parts. This 7-nanometer chip is a very advanced chip, and it's now in Huawei's 5G smartphone. This is very disturbing and a major violation of our export control laws. I sent a letter today to Secretary Raimondo, and I have jurisdiction over BIS, which is a Bureau of Industry and Security, in charge of export control, because this was not enforced. And now they've got this very advanced technology, 7-nanometer chip. When you look at the hypersonic program, that was built on the backbone of American technology. when it comes to the 7-nanometer chip, and you look at things like AI and the future of warfare, which will involve this kind of semiconductor chip, that is what is most disturbing to me, is that now China, they're very good. They don't really invent things. They're very good at stealing our technology. And this is another good example. And the timing, Anne-Marie, this was announced the day that Secretary Raimondo left Beijing, with a real slap in the face that, hey, now we got your technology. We got your most advanced semiconductor chip. We got to stop doing this. We got to stop selling to China our most advanced technology that they then that will turn and use against us if, God forbid, we have a conflict in the Pacific.
Well, so then, Congressman, is your committee working up sanctions on SMIC, or should we be talking about a total severing, a total cutoff of our technological relationship with China at this point?
We can't cut all trade, but I would argue that with respect to certain sectors, like the advanced semiconductor chips, like AI, like quantum computing, this is something I've talked to the Commerce Department about, making it more rather than company specific, because China will change the name of the companies. But if you make it sector specific, to me, that's a better way to handle this. That way, all exports regarding AI cannot be exported to China. All exports regarding quantum and advanced semiconductor chips. And that way you deal with it in a very, I think, a broader blanket that I think would apply. And we're going to have commerce with China. They're a big market for the United States, and we buy a lot from them. But when it comes to national security supply chain, like semiconductors, like critical minerals, rare earth minerals, and medical, we need to start pulling that supply chain out. The reason I introduced the Chips for America Act and got it passed was Secretary Pompeo came to me and said, we got to pull supply chain out of Taiwan because TSMC controls 90% of the advanced semiconductor manufacturing for the world. So imagine a scenario where China invades Taiwan with a blockade and cutting the sea cable. Then they either own or will break 90% of the world's advanced semiconductor chip manufacturing.
When you look at what happened this week, we saw Kim Jong-un make his way to Russia to meet with President Putin. The individual who could probably put the pressure on both those two leaders, those dictators, would be Xi Jinping. Do you think it's wise the administration still seeks a meeting with Xi Jinping to try to make sure at least they're putting pressure on Beijing to then put more of a pressure on both its neighbors in Russia and in North Korea?
Look, I think it's always good to have meetings and have conversations, but you don't concede certain things. I think, we saw like certain export controls were pulled back prior to these meetings. You don't make concessions before just to have a meeting in and of itself. You have to negotiate out of strength and leverage, not out of weakness. And that's my concern about, the meetings that took place. I don't think China is going to ever talk Kim Jong-un down because, Chairman Xi is a direct ally of Putin. I mean, they made this unholy alliance at the Beijing Olympics just weeks before the invasion into Ukraine. And the idea that they're not joined at the hip is absolutely false. I mean, this is an alliance of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. North Korea is going to start putting their stuff in. Iran's already putting their drones into Ukraine. We're even seeing, mercenaries from Cuba, going into Russia and into the Ukraine fight. So this is really playing out very dramatically between these dictators and the rest of the free world. And that's really what's at stake right now.
These are dangerous times, and we're glad to have you with us, Mr. Chairman. Michael McCaul.
Thanks, Joe.
Congressman from Texas who chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Don't be a stranger. We'd like to stay in touch with you on these issues.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app. Or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
The headline on the terminal, Republicans kick off Biden impeachment push on uncertain ground. It gets to the fact that the votes, well, they may not be there, and that's maybe why Speaker McCarthy is launching an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden without calling a vote, knowing that he demonized Nancy Pelosi for doing the very same thing back in 2014. And here we are again. I guess that was 2019, forgive me. The 24th of September, as he reminded us today, and this is what he said at that moment.
Our job is to legislate, not to continue to investigate something in the back when you cannot find any reason to impeach this president. She cannot unilaterally decide we're in an impeachment inquiry.
But there could be some other issues here. The call is coming from inside the House. Look no further than Matt Gaetz, the congressman from Florida, who took to the floor of the House yesterday to express his great disappointment in Mr. Speaker, impeachment inquiry or not.
No continuing resolutions, individual spending bills or bust, votes on balanced budgets and term limits, subpoenas for Hunter Biden and the members of the Biden family who've been grifting off of this country, and the impeachment for Joe Biden that he so richly deserves. Do these things or face a motion to vacate the chair.
Motion to vacate. Not if Marjorie Taylor Greene has anything to say about it, though. The congresswoman from Georgia talking about it on Newsmax, laying it down for Eric Bolling last night.
I think that we need to give Kevin McCarthy credit. He's doing the right thing, and he's actually leading the House and opening the impeachment inquiry that I've been demanding, Eric, and I'm thrilled about it. And I really want this to happen, and I don't want anyone to stop it. And so that's why I've been saying we don't need a motion to vacate. We don't need to be the party of chaos. We need to diligently do our work, continue with the impeachment inquiry.
And it's a riot if you're looking at the Twitter or the X. Marjorie Taylor Greene retweets Matt Gaetz, who, as you just heard, not happy with Speaker McCarthy. He says, remember, when Kevin McCarthy makes his announcement in moments, this was yesterday morning, that I pushed him for weeks. Marjorie Taylor Greene retweets saying, correction, my friend. I introduced articles of impeachment against Joe Biden for his corrupt business dealings on his very first day in office. And so this is going well so far in the first 24 hours. Let's assemble the panel. Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors, are with us. Jeanne, you can't buy this kind of entertainment, certainly not in Hollywood at the moment. How is this going to play out for Kevin McCarthy in the next couple of days? He's being asked about a double standard or a shifting message on whether to hold a vote for an impeachment inquiry. He's not even making his own Republican members like Matt Gaetz happy. So what happens next?
Yeah, and by the way, I'm going to vote for Marjorie Taylor Greene in the Marjorie Taylor Greene Matt Gaetz contest over who's most responsible. I am calling this the Halibut Diet Coke impeachment, because that is what the Times is reporting she and Trump were eating last Sunday night, 2 days before Kevin McCarthy. Yeah, it makes you hungry, right, Joe? 2 days before.
That must be well done halibut, I'm guessing.
2 days before we heard from Kevin McCarthy that indeed, forget what he said 13 days ago, he was marching forward with his impeachment inquiry with no vote. And, you know, the reality is Kevin McCarthy is in a very, very difficult position. And this is a reflection of that. You know, Stephanie Murphy, Representative Murphy, just talking about the hypocrisy, get ready for it. Well, here it is. It is on full display with what he did yesterday. I am somebody who famously was not in favor of Trump's first impeachment on Ukraine for the very reasons Nancy Pelosi said initially before she turned around, nor am I in favor of this. They are diminishing what impeachment was intended to do by the framers. And there is no putting the genie back in the bottle now. This is what we are going to have to live through. And look at the media coverage yesterday, a bleep on this, and then people just moved on, because this has just become sort of par for the course, where it never should have been and never was when you go back, you know, a few years ago.
What do you think of the language so far? It's been just 24 hours, Rick. The uprising inside the Freedom Caucus, where the Chip Roys and Andy Biggs say we're not changing our tune on a shutdown or a CR because of this. Matt Gaetz is yelling back and forth with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and journalists are asking about a changing tune on a vote. Did Kevin McCarthy just do the wrong thing? Was this self-preservation, or did he actually hurt himself with this announcement?
Well, I mean, he did this arguably to satisfy, the Freedom Caucus and its fringe groups, around it. And what has happened? They've sort of turned on themselves And so maybe that was part of his strategy, is just create chaos on the right flank and try to get some work done, in the House of Representatives with everybody else. I doubt if he's got that sophisticated of a strategy. He tries to make these people happy. These are performance artists. They're not members of Congress. They don't really care about legislating or, doing work of government. They care about, their number of Twitter hits and how many clicks they get. And that's why you have these kinds of outbursts. They're non-productive. And Kevin McCarthy is just sort of giving them something to chew on for a couple of days. We got to constantly remind ourselves inside the Beltway here, the vast majority of people in this country pay absolutely no attention to this because they see it for what it is. It's as Stephanie Murphy said, we are now watching the height of hypocrisy enter the House of Representatives. I mean, and she knows something about that, the time that she spent there. And I don't think Kevin McCarthy has done himself any good. He hasn't moved the ball forward. He isn't going to get anywhere on this impeachment. He's got over 30 House members who won't even vote for ultimately an impeachment, and we know it won't go anywhere in the Senate. So I think he's just unleashed the crazy caucus again, and we'll see if they can get anything done, because what's really important, is getting a budget passed, getting a CR passed so they can get the work done in the House, get some of these appropriations bills done. And by the way, and fund the Ukraine resistance to the Russian invasion, and make sure that our country is helping out these communities that have been devastated by horrible weather disasters. So I mean, they have things to do, and they ought to get off of Twitter and get on with their business.
Well, here, Rick, did this at least make a shutdown less likely, Jeanne, or did it not change anything in the standoff on the budget?
I think Kevin McCarthy was hoping it might, but we heard from Matt Gaetz, and you played the clip. He is demanding total compliance. And so, Kevin McCarthy, I think, believed that he was handing them something, going to sort of distract them, which has been his strategy since he became Speaker. Distract them by giving them something and hope that they don't see what's going on here, which is he needs to do the basic tasks of governing, which is keep the government open, stop it from being shut down. But look at what he's facing. The House has passed just one appropriations bill to the Senate, who has passed all of them. He knows that. He knows he doesn't have a leg to stand on here. They've got to do that. It's like a mayor who doesn't shovel the sidewalks after you have a terrible, terrible snowstorm. You're going to be in political trouble. Kevin McCarthy knows he's in trouble with this, so he's trying to distract them. But Matt Gaetz told us yesterday he's on to Kevin McCarthy now, and he's going to make sure to hold his feet to the fire. So I don't think this is going to help Kevin McCarthy in the way he thought. He is literally buying hours of his time in his job and hoping to stave off this motion to vacate, but it's going to come, as will the shutdown. And by the way, the impeachment inquiry vote. He's saying, to his 19 members in Biden districts, you don't have to vote for that. Well, I'll be the hypocrite and not let you vote. They're going to have to vote for that because this train is out of, it's left. They're going to have to vote on it.
Well, certainly if you believe there's going to be an impeachment that follows the inquiry. Listen, Rick and Jeanne, to Elise Stefanik, of course, in the Republican leadership in the House, held a news conference today alongside James Comer, who's spearheading this impeachment inquiry on the Oversight Committee. Listen to the language she used to describe the charges, which she believes are full-on crimes. Charges against Joe Biden.
Speaker McCarthy announced House Republicans' intention to pursue an impeachment inquiry of Joe Biden. This is about transparency and answers for the American people, and ultimately accountability for what I believe will uncover the biggest political corruption scandal in our nation's history.
The biggest public corruption scandal in our nation's history that would be something.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
I'm used to listeners and viewers telling me how to do my job, but the White House is a different level. A memo out to U.S. news media organizations in the wake of Speaker McCarthy's announcement that he is launching an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. The subject line, It's time for the media to do more to scrutinize House Republicans' demonstrably false claims that they're basing impeachment stunt on. Let's reassemble our panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino join Bloomberg Politics contributors as we consider the reaction from the White House. Rick, I don't know your thoughts on this. The memo goes down to the first series of bullets here refers to Representative Ken Buck, the Republican from Colorado, has been doing a lot of work for the White House last couple of days on cable news. He talked about it again on CNN, said he sees no evidence. This is a familiar refrain from Ken Buck. But should the White House be digging in like this or laughing it off right now?
Well, it's obvious this is a reaction to the coverage from the last couple of days, where I think they've got a chip on their shoulder, and they think that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz are getting way too much attention in the mainstream media because all they're talking about is a process argument. They're not answering any questions about what the real issue is here, and that the media is giving them more attention than the people who in the Republican caucus are actually saying they don't see the connection between Biden and these charges. So, and I kind of get that. I actually do think that the media has been chasing sort of the crazy end of the caucus, a lot more than it does everybody else. I mean, I think the bigger story is there are probably over 30 Republicans who don't support the speaker on this, which is why he had to unilaterally open up a probe. So I think they're a little bit taken aback that the media isn't doing their job for them. And this memo basically says, hey, you should be embarrassed by the fact that you're really not giving these guys more attention. The irony is they're using quotes in the media to make the case to the media that the media isn't doing enough. And so I think if I'm a reporter who are writing on these things, I'd think that they were kind of overinflating this.
Well, if the memo is just going to get leaked by the media, White House telling the media how to be better at the media, Jeanne, is there a point in sending it?
I think this is something that could backfire on the White House. I think putting out the facts is one thing, putting out their position is one thing, but trying to tell the media how to do their job, we all know no White House likes the media. But the reality is, if the media starts to exhibit some criticism of the Republicans and what they're doing in terms of impeachment, you're going to hear right back, oh, this is just the media doing the bidding, the liberal media doing the bidding of the White House. So I'm not sure how this helps the White House at all. I think more important is to keep focused on, number one, doing the business of the American people. Number two, putting out the facts. And let the craziness in the House play out. It speaks for itself. I don't know why they are trying to get in front of it, if you will, and make themselves the story.
Well, Rick, the craziness in the House, I guess, extends to the craziness in Washington as we have a breaking headline here that reminds us of the world that we're in. Mitt Romney is just now announcing in a Twitter video that he will not seek re-election in the Senate. I wonder your reaction to that news.
It's kind of expected. Mitt is never really been a feature of the Senate. He's had a stellar career as both governor and presidential candidate. I think he was looking at the sort of future trajectory of the Republican Party. And, I think he's kind of the outlier, right? He's more in the McCain wing of the Republican Party than he is in the Trump or whatnot wing, and he's pretty isolated in the caucus because of that. That being said, I think he's enjoyed being the senator, but politics at home also is very difficult. He'd have to run a probably very competitive primary, spend a lot of money, raise a lot of money, and those kinds of things, they take you away from your family and the work of the Senate, which is what he really enjoys. So I'm not surprised, but disappointed. You really hate to see a competitive seat like this, thrown open to whatever sort of, is lurking around Utah. But, he's served his country well, and I'm sure he has big plans for his life after the Senate.
Yeah, I do wonder what they'll include. But Jeanne, Democrats love moments like these. This is when you're supposed to tell me that the party has moved away from Mitt Romney, not the other way around, right?
Yeah, except I think it's a loss for all of us. I mean, Mitt Romney is one of the grown-ups, so to speak, in the room. We need more people at this point like Mitt Romney in Washington. Hard to believe. I didn't think several years ago I'd be saying that, but he does come with, telling it like it is and speaking truth to the powers that be in the Republican Party today. So I think it's a loss for all of us, not just for the Republican Party, but for sure Democrats are happy with what has transpired, and they would like to have a shot at that seat.
He's not going to run for president again, I'm assuming, Rick, although that story seems to crop up every 4 years. What is in store for someone like Mitt Romney? Where could he be of service?
Look, I mean, I think that obviously he has a point of view on democracy. He has been crisscrossing the country, talking about how important it is that our democratic institutions, elections and whatnot, are reinforced and really fortified against the attacks that the Trump administration and campaign waged against them. So I wouldn't be surprised that he devotes more of his time to really trying to cement our democratic institutions around the country and crisscross the country, talking about how important that is. He was generous enough with his time to come to the McCain Institute Sedona conference and gave a similar speech and was very passionate. It's probably one of the best speeches I'd ever seen Mitt Romney give. And believe me, I've seen a lot of Mitt Romney speeches over the years. And and this is an area I think he's very passionate about.
This is from the video just posted on Twitter.
The next generation of leaders must take America to the next stage of global leadership. While I'm not running for re-election, I'm not retiring from the fight. I'll be your United States Senator until January of 2025.
Mitt Romney announcing today he is not seeking re-election. This is Bloomberg. Thanks for listening to the Sound On podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at 1 p.m. Eastern Time at Bloomberg.com.